Hi, everyone. This is Caron Whitaker with the League of American Bicyclists. Thanks for joining us for this webinar on the 2023 National Bike Summit Legislative Asks. All right. So today what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about preparing for your Hill meetings and then talk about the asks, which are going to be the Lenkenkamp Safety Act, the Complete Streets Act of 2024, and an education bill yet to be named. And I'll explain that when we get there. And then we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers. So just a review from the Lobby 101 webinar. There's a couple things you can do before the summit that's going to make you feel a little more prepared for when you get here. And some of that is just to research who your member of Congress is, what their, and your senators, what their priority issues are, do they co-sponsor, any, and you can find that either through their website. Most of their websites is lastname.house.gov for members of Congress and lastname.senate.gov for your senators. So looking at their website, I'll show you some things on our website where you can find some information about them. And then I always say, like, practice how you're going to introduce yourself and why bicycling is important to you. So I might say, I'm Caron Whitaker. I live in Washington, D.C. I'm a member of the Washington Area Bicyclists Association, or WABA. And I really care about bicycling because I don't have a car. So it's really important to me to be able to bike, to whether it's to see some friends or go to work or just go shopping or to my daily activities. So we now have the feature on our website for you to find your elected officials there. You could also just type into Google, who's my member of Congress. But generally, if you go to our Take Action Center and click on the scorecard link here in red, and then you put in your zip code. I did that for where I grew up in Massachusetts. Because my town is in 2 different congressional districts, I had to actually put in my address. But then I got my 2 senators, Senator Warren, Senator Markey, Representative Moulton. And I clicked on Senator Markey. And this is going to show me, of the bills that the league is supportive of, what has he co-sponsored? So he's co-sponsored most of them. He's the original co-sponsor, and original co-sponsor generally means the author of the bill. Usually it's 1 or 2 members of Congress. Sometimes it's 4. And then a co-sponsor is someone who's also agreed to put their name on that legislation. So he supported most of the things we've done, but I see there's one here that he hasn't. Bike on long distance trails. So if I were to look at that, if I were to click on a bill, it's going to tell me a little bit about what that bill is. And I look at this and I say, oh, well, there's only 4 sponsors, so it hasn't gone very far. The other thing I want to show you on this is if you go down to the bottom, there's a download PDF. And you can download that, and it's going to tell you a little bit about, it's going to print this out for you. It's going to give you a little bit of a biography, and also their website. And their website is a great place to really sort of learn about what it is that they care about. So one of the things we suggest at the top of a meeting is to look for something to say thank you for. Did they co-sponsor legislation? What we just talked about. Did they support a local project or an earmark? In the email I sent to everyone who's registered to lobby, I put in a link so that you can see the earmarks that members of Congress supported this year, both the ones that got funded and the ones that didn't. So you can look through that to see if there's something in your district there. When you look at their website, what are you seeing as their priorities? Is there something maybe that you can thank them for either in Washington or in your own district? These pictures on the right, on the top right, is Representative Bouchon from Indiana. He's a doctor and he's a Republican, and he's very, very supportive of a smaller government. So he has not always been as supportive of the things we care about, but he is a doctor. And so he did go out to an event to talk about it was a bike ride in support of a health issue. And so that was something that we could say thank you for, and we got him on board. And then a couple of years later, we actually did get him to co-sponsor something on safety. So, that sort of, this is a way of building that relationship. In the bottom is Representative Quigley giving us the thumbs up from a bike ride that he did in his district in Illinois. So anything you can find like that, super helpful. And if you can't find anything that everyone on your group agrees to say thank you for, then I would say, just say, hey, thanks for taking the time to meet with us. But hopefully there's something a little more interesting. So the next thing that we talked about in the meeting flow is sort of talking about bicycling in your district. And there's a couple ways you can do that. The most important way is to tell your story about, why you're there. Are you part of a local group? What brings you all the way to Washington to talk about this? But then we also wanted to give you some resources to show like interest from your city or businesses or any interest from your state. And I think particularly in the House, the more local you can get, the better. And I think that's a really great use of looking at Bicycle Friendly America Awards. They're all listed by district, so you can figure out, okay, and this is going to be in your lobby packet. But if you're from the Prescott area, you can say, hey, look, bicycling is so important for our city. They actually went through this process to apply and win an award for it. And that's super helpful. If you don't see anything in your district, but you see something in another district, maybe a town that your town is competitive with, you can talk about like how bicycling is making that other city more competitive. But if you don't see anything here, we're also going to have in your packet a list of Safe Streets for All grants. And so this is another chance for you to say, look, our city is concerned with the safety of everyone, of vulnerable road users, and they've actually gone out and gotten a grant to do some planning around this. And then the other thing in your packet will be a fact sheet about your state and money that they have either obligated or grants that have been awarded. So transportation alternatives, that program represents about 50% of the federal dollars that go out for biking and walking. And so we'll show 2-year obligated funds. And just a reminder, obligated means it's under contract, like they've signed the contract, it's ready to go. And where it says awarded, like Safe Streets for All, that means it's been announced. Like DOT has told your community, hey, we got a grant. So, so the transportation alternatives number shows it's a big number, 21.5 million in 2 years, has been, put under contract to build biking and walking projects. For states where 15% or more of your fatalities are bicyclists and pedestrians and other vulnerable road users, you'll have this highway safety improvement program block here. And if you have that, if your state is one of these and you see this on your sheet, your state has obligated 100% of the dollars that they had available in 2025. And that's a huge accomplishment. So those are always really good numbers to mention. We talked about the Safe Streets for All. We have the grants here. And then the other thing on the bottom you can show is just how many different programs within the transportation program your state has pulled on to build biking and walking. That shows a real commitment, I would say, to building biking and walking, that they've looked at all these different programs. Now, we all can't live in Colorado. So let's look at Alabama. And so Alabama, one, obligated more money in transportation alternatives than Colorado did, which is, quite surprising. I would argue Colorado may have used higher numbers than some of the other programs. But two, Alabama is one of the states that didn't hit that vulnerable road user special rule. So they don't have that 15% of safety dollars here. So this is what your fact sheet will look like. If you don't have that, you'll have the 2 pictures at the bottom. The transportation alternatives, and again, 12 grants for Safe Streets for All. That's a great sign. So you'll have your state fact sheet and you can find that information. And when you're using these fact sheets, you don't have to use them all, and you don't have to figure out how to talk about all of them. I want you to think about what makes the most sense for your state or your district and pick the one that is comfortable for you. Like, hey, I think this, I really care about bicycling for this reason. And when I think about what our community has done, they've recognized that, particularly if safety is an issue and you've gotten a Safe Streets for All grant, you might want to just pull that one out and be like, look, our city is committed to working on improving safety for all users, including people biking and walking. And we believe that, these asks that we're going to talk about are going to help us do that. So pick the one that works. In a Senate office, you might want to move more towards the state sheet, unless your members is very connected to a local area or knows about something going on in your local area. So you can do either of those. If you don't use the other sheets, don't worry about it. Maybe as you're leaving at the end of the meeting and you're handing them your lobby packet, you can say, hey, there's more state-specific fact sheets in the folder. Because I will say, whenever I bring in the BFA list to a congressional office, they always want to take a minute and look at what's in their district. Okay, so maybe you want to look at those. First of all, when you come to the summit, we'll give you a lobby folder, what we call a leave behind on the right. And that is something that'll have all the fact sheets in it. And that is something that you leave with the congressional staffer when you leave, or the member of Congress. Now, you also have access to all of these fact sheets if you want to check them out ahead of time. And that's in the Hoover app. So when you open the Summit Hoover app, you go to Agenda. Within Agenda, first pick the March 20th, which is the Wednesday, the Hill Day. Go down to Lobby Hill meetings. When you click in there, you'll find links to these fact sheets and lobby materials. The other link takes you to the scorecard, and I just added one in for earmarks. So, and when you get there, that's going to click you into a Google folder, and you can find what you want. So SSFA, the Safe Streets for All fact sheets, the funding fact sheets are the one by state that we talked through, and then the BFA list. The Complete Streets fact sheet is already there, and the one for the Lankenkamp bill and the education bill will be there by Monday. But if you got my email to invite you to this webinar, you have draft copies of those fact sheets too. So you have access to all the information you'll need. So now I want to talk through those legislative asks. And I'm going to start with the Sarah Debbick Langenkamp Active Transportation Safety Act. It's a long title. For shorthand, I'm going to talk about it as the Langenkamp Safety Act. So we did this one last year, and several of you may remember it, but Sarah Langenkamp was a US diplomat. She was stationed in Ukraine with her husband through mid-2022. They left to come home over the summer, settled in Maryland, and on her way home from visiting the elementary school where her kids were enrolling, she was hit and killed in a crash with a truck. And so while we did have a truck ask last year, the legislation that we named after her is about biking and walking safety. And it does a couple of things. First of all, it highlights the need to build connected networks, but it also makes it easier for states and local governments to fund biking and walking safety projects. This bill is not going to cost any new money, and it doesn't require state DOTs to do anything. It just gives them the flexibility to fund biking and walking safety projects. And this is really just a fix to some language that was in the bipartisan infrastructure law. So the specifics, yeah, it highlights the need to fill gaps in networks. It allows the state to use highway safety dollars as a match for transportation alternatives. I'll talk about that in a minute. And it gives states the flexibility to fund biking and walking safety projects with up to 100% of federal money, so there wouldn't be a local match. So the specifics, there's transportation alternatives is a federal program where all the money goes to local priorities, and about between 95 to 98% of it gets spent on biking and walking projects. It's the largest source for funding for biking and walking, right? The Highway Safety Improvement Program, their goal is to reduce fatalities, but where transportation alternatives is really a locally focused program, the Highway Safety Program is very top down. So under the IIJA, or the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, that big law that passed in 2021, the goal was to say that a state could use the HSIP dollars, those safety dollars, as a local match for the transportation alternatives projects. But we ran into a snag because the way that the Federal Highways Administration interpreted that was that in order to use the highway safety dollars, the state had to have done a data-driven process and identified all those projects. And then the local government had to apply for one of those projects in the safety plan for it to match. And it's just one of those fundamental mismatches we found from how local governments make decisions and states make decisions. So to clarify that, the bill says, okay, a state DOT has the flexibility to use Highway Safety Improvement Program dollars to match local safety projects. And then it defines local safety projects as a project in the state's strategic highway safety plan, a transportation alternatives project that is an FHWA proven safety countermeasure, or a project that's in a local safety plan. So I'm giving you a very detailed definition, but all you need to know is that it allows the state to fund a local safety project. The state doesn't have to, but the state can say, you know what, we like that local plan, we're going to just incorporate it into ours. So that's what this does. And that's really important because when we look at that Safe Streets for All grant program, in 2 years, over 1,000 communities have grant to either do a plan or they already had a plan. And that covers 70% of the US population. So if the federal government is funding all these local governments to do safety plans, why are we making the state go back and redo it? The state should just use what the locals have because the locals generally know their area better, right? So that's the argument we're making. Let's give those states the flexibility to say, hey, any community in Iowa, we're just going to take your priorities and put them into our safety plan, and then we're going to be able to match it, and we're going to make it easier. So that's what this program does. And I'm going to do 1 or 2 more slides on this, and then I'll stop and take any questions specific to this bill if you have them. The other thing it does is it talks about if a local project is a proven safety countermeasure, it should count. And in fact, it says that a state should be able to use up to 100% safety dollars on any proven safety countermeasure. Now, there are proven safety countermeasures because the Federal Highway Administration has said, you know, these are, we've been able to prove, we've done studies, we've done the research, we know these actually improve benefits. So bike lanes and walkways count, all these other things count. I mean, so it might not cover every single project you want to do, but it's most of them. So it shows that a bike lane can reduce crashes by 49% in a 4-lane undivided collector road, a local road. And then if you make that bike lane a protected bike lane, you're going to reduce bicycle vehicle crashes by another 53%. So FHWA has proved this, they believe it. one of the questions I always get is, well, won't local governments or states use this to build any program that's not a safety project? I said, no, they can't. They can only use it for safety projects. And FHWA has proven that these are they. All right, so this bill is already in the House. It is being introduced in the Senate in the next day or two. Right now, the co-sponsors, we have 3 Democrats, the 2 senators from Maryland, where the Lankenkamps live, and then Tammy Baldwin from Wisconsin, which is the state where her family is from and where her parents live now. If there's anyone from Wisconsin out there, we are working really hard to get Senator Johnson on this bill. So feel free to reach out to his office, or if he hasn't signed on by the time you get here next week, please really push that office. We really want to get him on. Okay, in the House, it was originally introduced by Representative Blumenauer from Oregon and Representative Raskin, who represents the Lankenkamps district. It's bipartisan. We have 5 Republicans. We have 42 Democrats. We're trying to build up both sides of that. So another reason to look up the co-sponsors to go to that scorecard is to see if your member has already co-sponsored. If they have, you can just thank them for it and you don't have to talk about the bill. And again, there's the address to get there. All right, so with that, let's see if we have any questions specific to this bill. All right. We have the Wisconsin Bicycle Federation is on it. All right, any other questions on this? Going once, going twice.
So in terms of how this bill helps clarify the language and so forth, would like a concrete example be, we already have in our state strategic plan or our municipal strategic plan to revise intersections with speed tables or revise 4 lanes into a 3-lane reconfiguration. But right now we first have to go through the process of identifying these 15 intersections before being able to apply for a grant. Only after the Lankenkamp bill, we'd be able to apply prior to the specific 15 or so. Would that be a reasonable example?
It's more that your local government has identified these, but if they aren't in the state plan, then you can't use safety funds to fix them.
Oh, gotcha.
Okay.
I have a question as well. And I apologize if this you've already talked about 2, right? This is also the Safe Streets one?
This is one bill. This is the Lankenkamp bill. It's not, there isn't a bill on safe streets right now.
Okay.
We're working on. You're thinking of something different.
Okay. The reason I'm asking is the idea that you can get full 100% no local match for TASA projects, transportation alternatives projects. Our state already says there's no match for construction, but the municipality has to provide design.
Okay.
And they won't fund design.
So the state won't fund design, but they will fund 100% of construction?
Yes.
Okay. That's a very specific. I mean, there are some states that do fund design, there are some that aren't, but I don't know of states that don't require the match. So in that way, you're actually a little ahead.
Well, they consider design the match.
Okay.
And they have a reason for doing it. The reason is that often there are cost escalations during construction, and the match would therefore escalate. And they have ways to cover the construction increase, but they feel that it would torpedo the project if suddenly it cost more for the municipality. So they have, okay, you put in your money for the design and then we just proceed from there. But it's still that then design becomes our hurdle.
Okay. That is a separate issue that I did hear about on the survey, but it's not necessarily represented in these asks. I did want to go to the chat and I asked, are there Republican senators that we're currently targeting? So as well as Senator Johnson, yeah, I think Senator Wicker is a possibility. I think Senator Sullivan from Wicker is from Mississippi. Sullivan from Alaska is a possibility, but it's worth continuing to talk. I know that there's been some outreach to Senator Haggerty in Tennessee as well. I think and maybe Cassidy from Louisiana. All right, I'm going to go on to the next ask. This is the Complete Streets Act of 2024. Okay, so this is, I think we've talked about complete streets for a long time, and I think you're all familiar with the idea that a complete street is a street or a facility that's built for everyone, for all modes of transportation and people of all ages, whether you're biking, walking, driving, taking transit. And it's something, as I said, we've been asking for a long time, and we've come a long way. There's over 1,300 local communities, counties, we've got one tribe, 36 states that have a complete street policy of some kind. We also had a little bit of a win in IIJA, where there's a set aside on planning funds. So states have to set aside 2.5% of both their state planning funds and their metropolitan planning organization funds. So they're setting aside some funds both at the state level and at the metropolitan level. And those funds can be used to adopt complete streets standards and policies, or a complete streets prioritization plan, or another plan related to active transportation and safety. And on top of that, the Federal Highways Administration and the Federal Transit Administration has said, you know what? If you're doing a complete streets plan with this money, or you're doing a prioritization plan, it's 100% federally funded. You can use 100% of this towards those plans. So it's not a ton of money, but it is a commitment. And so we've come a long way on that. But I think we also know that not everywhere has a plan, and plans are usually looking forward, and they're not always talking about fixing existing problems. And so we still get streets like this. On the left side, I just love that that road is called Paradise Road. So the Complete Streets Act of 2024, it's the next step. What it would do is it would require FHWA to clarify standards and guidelines for what makes a complete streets policy. I've heard that from some of you, that like sure, that funding from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, or IIJA, that funding is great, but the requirements are so open-ended that it doesn't really do that much. So this would require FHWA to clarify what they mean by consider all users, set some guidelines and some design standards, things like that. And then it will require every state to set aside 5% of their highway dollars. That's all the road programs, to create a complete streets grant program. And that would work, it would be at the state level, and local governments would apply. But in order to apply, the local government would have to have a complete streets policy and a prioritization plan. And that plan is basically a list of priority projects. So that's the idea behind it. And what we know, so after that requirement for the planning money in the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, or IIJA, FHWA did a complete streets assessment where they went out to all the states and asked them, like, do you have a plan? How are you using the plan? How are you interacting with local governments? So we see 36 states and territories have a plan. We have another 3 that are working on plans. But then, so that was sort of the starting, Kate, at the 63%. But when we asked them, you know, are you as a DOT, or I didn't ask them, when FHWA asked them, you know, are you engaging with with projects, complete streets projects in rural communities and small towns, 84% of the state DOTs said they were. And when they were asked, are you contributing to regional and local planning efforts to address complete streets? Basically, 50% are actively doing it, but 94% said they have some role in that. So we're seeing that this is already happening. So the idea is all these communities, they've had, they're going to have 5 years of funding to do these plans. They're probably, hopefully, or these policies, those policies may overlap with some of those things in those safe streets for all grants. So they've had 5 years to do it. The states are already involved in this. So the next step is like, let's set aside some money for the states to actually fund complete streets projects. We've been talking about policies for years. Now let's get into projects, whether that's fixing one of those problems like in the pictures I just showed, or a new project that's coming along and making sure that it really is a complete street project. All right, so in the House, it's the authors of it are Steve Cohen from Tennessee and Jake Auchincloss from Massachusetts. They've got a few other co-sponsors, but it's a pretty new bill, so most of you will be going into offices that haven't signed on yet. And in the Senate, it's also a new bill. It's led by Senator Markey, Massachusetts, Blumenthal from Connecticut, Warnock from Georgia, and Heinrich from New Mexico, which that's really nice because we have a lot of different regions of the country. So let me see. So with that, I'll stop and again see, I'm going to open the chat, see if there's any questions. So I've got a question from Michael. Is there any language in the bill about who or what entities FHWA would need to work with to develop their definition of complete streets policy? There's no requirement on who they'd work for, but Congress actually, before the bipartisan infrastructure law happened, there was a House version that actually laid out a lot of specifics. So I think they'll look at that. I think they'll look at what Smart Growth America and others are saying. And for those who remember Barbara McCann, she was the person who founded the National Complete Streets Coalition. She is actually in the safety office at FHWA. So we have some folks on the inside. So we see a question from David about how this affects states that already have a state complete streets grant. I'm going to guess you're from Massachusetts, because this policy was adapted from Massachusetts. So, and that's why I think you see Massachusetts people on both sides of Congress supporting it. I don't think it would affect it that much. If anything, I think it would augment it. Okay, yeah, I got a question about a community in Colorado that's having a hard time getting safety projects because they don't have a high fatality rate. Well, a complete streets program like this would help fix that. This would help fix that. I got a question. So let me just finish this one on complete streets. There would be grant money then to work on some of those programs. I would also tell you, if you need planning grants or you're interested in doing a demonstration project, look at the Safe Streets for All, because that program is undersubscribed, which means that if you fill out the application correctly, you're almost guaranteed a grant. Okay, and then a question from Jamie. Is there a fact sheet that lists complete streets policies in cities or metro areas by state? There is. It's on the Smart Growth America website, and I will send that around. But if you go to completestreets.org or completethestreets.org, that will get you onto their website. And you can hunt around there. I'll also try to send a link for that. All right. Any other questions on complete streets? Great. All right, now I want to go on to this bike education bill, which is at this point still theory. We're hoping to get that introduced this week. But one of the things that's happened in Congress with the fact that they've had this budget debate over and over and over again, and then we saw that debate about a border bill and foreign aid, they're very slow at getting things introduced. So we don't have the legislative language yet, but we are working really hard to get that introduced by Friday. So I'm moving as if we're gonna have it introduced, and I'm gonna talk about it, but that's, if you got the email that I sent about this, it has the draft language there. So, or not the draft language, it has a fact sheet there, a draft fact sheet. But, so I'm gonna talk through it as if it's gonna be there. And so, just to back up a little bit, within the transportation law, there's a lot of infrastructure grants, right? Like we talked about transportation alternatives, A-SHIP, Safe Streets for All. A lot of those funds, plans, and then actual infrastructure. On the other side, there's highway safety grants, which are the other E's, if you let me say that. So education, encouragement, and enforcement grants in transportation. At the federal level, they come from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. They go to the state Governor Highway Safety Office. And in every state, it's different. Some of those Governor Highway Safety Offices are in the governor's office. Some of them are in the US DOT. Sometimes they're in the Division of Motor Vehicles. So they're different for every state. But they then make grants to law enforcement or local governments or NGOs. So this is funding to do a lot of education. Sometimes in Washington, D.C., we see a lot of public service announcements on the sides of our buses. It can be things like that. So under this program, there's two big funding sources. One is 402, it's called, and that's available in all states, and it can definitely be used for bike education. A lot of you may already be getting grants for this for bike education. And it can be used for in-school bike education, although that's not necessarily widely known. There's another program that's a 405 program, which is available to those states, just like the special rule money, to states where 15% or more of your fatalities are vulnerable road users. And that right now, the eligibilities, we changed them a little bit in the bipartisan bill to be able to do demonstration projects and things like that. But the focus has been on law enforcement. And we've also found that that program is undersubscribed. So for the 32 states and DC, this is just another funding source that isn't being used. So what this bill would do, it does two things. It does bike education in school, but it also does vulnerable road user friendly drivers education. It makes that eligible for both sets. So everyone could apply for that. It also means that in-school bicycle education would be eligible for 405. It already is for 402. So then there's more funding for that in-school bike education. And it would direct the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, or NHTSA, to update its school bicycle education curriculum. It has a curriculum. It's 10 years old. You know, and we think that by updating it, they'll make it both more useful and we'll also get more attention to it. So it would require NHTSA to update the education curriculum, disseminate it through the states, and then report back to Congress on if they've had any uptake of it. And that's sort of our way of really saying, no, you really need to do this because we're going to ask you about it later. So a little bit on the messaging of this bill. It's the way I've been talking about it is that I think it can be a really effective use of this funding. Like you know, we all do a lot of bike, or a lot of the state and local groups in the league do a lot of education. But the idea of doing it in school, where it's not just a one-day event, but kids get that message over and over again, or maybe they get it, you know, for a month, or maybe they get it 1 year and then they get it again, that can really help. The other thing is we see a lot of this money go for things, in particular, helmet giveaways, which it's great to give away helmets. We definitely support that. But if you don't actually then teach people or kids how to use the helmet correctly and how to wear it correctly, you know, you're losing some of that effectiveness. And then the third thing, and this is in the fact sheet, there's been some studies that show there's that recycling effect where if you teach the kids safe biking, they go home and talk to their parents about it. Right? So those are some of the arguments I've been doing. For this, I said, for the skeptics, for people who are like, oh, you know, and one of the things you'll hear is, why are we giving money that is not infrastructure based? The fact is they are. And so what's good about this bill, it doesn't require any more money, and it is non-infrastructure money. So they're going to say we shouldn't be spending infrastructure money on education programs. And you can say, well, this is already soft money. This is already non-infrastructure money. So we're just trying to make that money as effective as possible. And as in the Langenkamp bill, it still gives the states that flexibility on what to fund. And so one thing I'll say, having talked to some offices about it, you know, looking for a co-sponsor, nobody really objects to this, but they're not like, they're sort of like, oh, is this going to make a big enough change? So if you are coming from a state where maybe your organization is already working in schools to do bike education, and you're seeing some of those results, and you can talk about it, and you can talk about how much more you could do if there's a little bit more money to do it. If you're from Minnesota or Washington State, and your state requires some sort of active transportation training, you can say, hey, here's a way that we can pay for it using non-infrastructure dollars. So just showing some enthusiasm on the benefit of this, I think, is really going to help. It's going to help us sell it. And just finally, the sponsor right now that we're working with is Representative Magaziner from Rhode Island. And Rhode Island DOT is already investing in in-school education, in-school on-bike education for the whole state. So it's a great example of where it's working, of where there's support at the state level, and we wanted to use that to spread it throughout. And also, what I haven't focused on here, but I think can be a real advantage, is that BRU-friendly drivers education. I know for a long time we were really trying to push to get 1 or 2 questions into the driver's education tests at the state level for this. And so again, the idea that there could be federal money that we could work in some curriculum, some questions on that, I think could make a big difference. It could also then be available to law enforcement, to cities and towns, to state DOTs, to train their drivers to be like the bicycle-friendly driver piece. So that's our third bill. Those are the asks. And the ask for each of these is, Senator, will you co-sponsor? Member of Congress, will you co-sponsor? Or if you're meeting with the staff, will the senator co-sponsor this? And I also just want to say, with the exception of the Langenkamp bill in the House, all of these are pretty new. So there's not a ton of co-sponsors, and you may be the first person taking this legislation to the offices. And as always, if they ask you a detailed question, you don't know the answer, that's fine. Just tell them, I don't know, but I can find that answer out for you. And let me know, I'll help you find the answer, and then you can bring it back to them. All right, with that, I'm gonna stop the share and open it up for questions. I'm going to start in the chat box. So Lisa asked, this would be work well for a strong Safe Routes program. Yeah, absolutely. Safe Routes is often focused on the commute to and from school, but this is an opportunity to talk about, to really help kids learn the skills to actually ride a bike and practice the traffic garden, you know, several times. Maybe we've seen some schools actually put traffic gardens in their school parking lot so they can use that for education. It just broadens the ability to do education and do it on over a longer term. Okay, so we got a question. Assuming your representative has co-sponsored or sponsored a bill, what would be the next priority? So I would say I don't think there's anyone who's co-sponsored everything, with the potential exception of Earl Blumenauer. But definitely, but even he isn't on the education bill because it hasn't been introduced yet. So there's always something to ask for. Okay, we got a question. Would the bike education bill allow for funding for program staff rather than just equipment and material? So it would be the same thing as if your local group gets funding to do bike education and you're able to use that for some of your LCIs, you'd be able to use this for your LCIs. It's at the federal level, it's pretty broad, and then states may have their own specifics under it. Okay, so the bike education bill hasn't been introduced yet, so we don't have a number. But our goal is to get that to you as soon as possible. So Michael had a question about bike buses as a form of education. Would it cover that? It's not really envisioned to cover that, but I do think you could use 402 funds. That's sort of like a Safe Routes to School piece. So you use Safe Routes to School funding for that. Probably use the 402 funds for that. Okay. Will the bike education bill be introduced in the Senate as well? That is our goal, but it won't be in time for the summit. We've just, this is a very technical answer, but when you write a bill in Congress, I sort of, what will happen is I'll work with the congressional office to say these are the changes I want to see in the legislative language. And then they give it to what's called the Leg Council, which is the Leg Council is an office of lawyers who then take that language and make sure it works with all the other transportation law that's out there. Usually it takes about 3 weeks for that process to happen. We gave them this bill the first week in January, and we haven't gotten it back yet. So we're really trying to push them to get it back. And that is because the budget bill is thousands and thousands of pages, and they've written multiple versions of that in these 3 months. So we're working on it. The goal is to get it introduced in the House and the Senate, but I really want to get it. We're really trying hard to get it in the House, because when you all come to town, you can really push out this agenda to so many offices at once that would take me all year to do. So that's our goal. Let's see. I've got, so the Safe Streets for All grant list is from USDOT. I can't correct that. You can contact them. We've got a comment from Pennsylvania that their list is a little messed up. If it's the congressional offices, that I can fix. So we got a question about a state that has allocated 10 million for Safe Routes to School, but hasn't spent anything. The Complete Streets bill Would that be a motivator? It could be, because then a community could apply to the state and say, hey, we've identified all these projects. We need help getting them funded. The Lankenkamp bill could also help, because you could then match safety funds with active transportation funds. And I think that would be really helpful. I'm not sure where you're from, but there's a lot of states that have leftover Safe Routes to School funds from before 2013. And those funds are 100% federal. And so there may be an opportunity to get some of those funded. You can contact me offline and I can check to see if your state is one of the states. Let's see. All right. All right. Any other questions? I'm seeing nothing new in the chat. Okay, the other thing I'll say is in the email I sent a link to the earmarks or congressionally designated projects / earmarks that were in the budget, that the transportation part of the budget has passed. I've also put that into the Summit Hoover app under Wednesday, the Hill Day, under lobby meetings. So that's just another place to see if your member of Congress has gotten a project included there. All right, no questions? You guys got the ask down? Bill, I see you laughing.
Well, we can get the copy of your whole presentation still, yes?
Yes, absolutely. I'll put the slides to this and my other lobby day also in the Hoove app.
Okay.
Okay. I got a questions on the logistics for lobby day. So Tuesday at the summit, I'll give a version of this presentation again, and then you'll have a chance to sit down with everyone from your state together, look over the asks, plan your day, and sort of walk through what those meetings are going to be like. Every state has a state coordinator. And so you should also be hearing from your state coordinator. I think either later this week or early next week, we'll send you the schedule as is, so you'll know when your meetings are and where they are. Tuesday, you'll come to the summit, you'll talk with everyone else in the group, figure out your strategy going into those meetings, where you're going to meet, all of that. And then on Wednesday, we'll have those Hill meetings. I hope that helps. Yeah, and you'll get all the fact sheets. Your state coordinator will have all the fact sheets for all the meetings that they've been able to set up. And you'll go from there. I will say, when you get your schedule, there's still going to be meetings that look like they're requested but not finalized. A lot of these meetings get finalized at the last minute. It is just how Congress works. It drives me crazy too. So, but yeah, but don't worry if you see that meetings are still under the requested. All right. Okay, the other thing I'll say is that morning, for those of you who don't know, Earl Blumenauer, who's been our champion since the mid-90s, is retiring. This is going to be his last bike summit. And so that morning on March 19th, we're going to do a short bike ride with him, only about 3 miles. If you come out early, we'll have breakfast. He's going to talk about all the progress we've made. He's going to give a short speech, and then we're going to go do a 3-mile bike ride with him just to celebrate. So I hope you all can make that as well. All right, I'll say, so between now and then, if a question comes up, go ahead and email me. You can also, you know what, maybe I'll make, I'll go into the community on the Hoova app and start a discussion for lobby hobby questions. And then we can put the answers there. And so if somebody asks a question similar to yours, you'll see them there. So do get it onto your Whova app. Thank you for being here. And I'm really excited to see everybody in a couple of days. So thank you. And I'm gonna just ask Michael and Jamie and Zoe, and I think there was somebody else to stick around for a minute.